We are here to introduce Taught by the Pen, as Tobias mentioned, which opens officially this Wednesday. And this will be the first full building exhibition of our collection of Islamic manuscripts, which, as you'll hear, are substantial. I'll start off this afternoon by giving you a broad overview of the exhibition and the collections that it draws from before handing it off to my dear colleagues, Robin and Özgen, to dive in deeper, to share some of their favorites from the collections, and to give you a sense of how they've come to Yale. Taught by the Pen highlights a huge collection of manuscripts produced in the Islamic world. At over 4,000 items, Yale Special Collections hold the third largest collection of Islamic and Near Eastern manuscripts in this hemisphere. As you'll hear from Robin later today, it's both one of the largest and also one of the oldest collections in the United States. For this exhibition, we've whittled that massive collection down to just under 150 items, ranging from the 9th to the 20th centuries. And through them, we invite visitors and we invite you all to engage with the intellectual and aesthetic values and practices of the many peoples and communities encompassed by Islamic civilization. On this side, you see a selection of the kinds of materials you'll encounter if you join us for the exhibition. Our collections are very strong in Arabic and Ottoman Turkish manuscripts, so for instance, which are the Ottoman Turkish is on the top left, Arabic, that image is from an Arabic manuscript in the top right, as well as Urdu and Coptic. And that Coptic manuscript in the bottom right corner in particular highlights some of the really wonderful linguistic and cultural exchange that underpin the exhibition. So in that image of the Coptic manuscript, you see Coptic on the left and then Arabic script on the right. And to give you kind of a more intense example of, or three more intense examples of that linguistic mixing that you'll encounter in the exhibition, these three manuscripts, if you are familiar with Armenian, or can read Armenian, can read an Arabic script language, or perhaps can read Hebrew, you might be a bit flummoxed by what is going on here. And these are beautiful examples of the ways in which you often have languages, one language written in perhaps in the script of another. So from the left, that is Turkish and Armenian script. In the middle, we have Afrikaans in Arabic script, and then an inscription in Judeo-Arabic from one of our early printed Hebrew books, which was published in Turkey in the 1490s. And in addition to this idea of exchange, we were guided in preparing our exhibition by the inscriptions above the front door of Sterling Memorial Library, which is just around the corner. And what you see here is the decoration above the right-hand door of the main entrance. And in the leftmost panel, you see an excerpt of Surah 96, chapters 1 to 5, which reads, "Recite in the name of your Lord who created humankind from a clot of blood. Recite, for your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught humankind what it did not know," and this in the translation of Thomas Cleary. And we take our title from this surah because the pen and all that has flown from it are at the center of this exhibition as we dive into the world of manuscripts. Through our selection of materials, we hope to show how, taking this commandment to heart, Muslim scholars systematically organized and extended almost every field of knowledge in astonishing new ways. And as we're talking about every field of knowledge, you no doubt have already noticed that we're covering a vast territory in just one exhibit. So chronologically, we're over 1,000 years. Geographically, we're grounded in the broader Mediterranean, but stretch from North Carolina to Indonesia. And so to make this all understandable to our visitor, we've broken up the exhibition into more easily digestible categories. And here what you're looking at is the curved case on the south side of the Beinecke, which begins if the slide I had at the very beginning is the actual beginning of the exhibition overview text, this now begins kind of the overview labels of our exhibition. And I will say that I think our graphic designers did an absolutely beautiful job setting this up. But here you see some of the categories that you'll encounter to help you navigate the exhibition and navigate our categories. So you'll encounter, among other things, we start with Qur'ans and other examples of expressions of faith. And the Quran that you see here is a wonderful example of the beautiful opening pages you get, particularly in illuminated Qur'ans, where the decoration extends across both sides of the page opening. We also, following this focus on faith very broadly, we extend to philosophy, history, literature, science and medicine, various genres here represented by this beautiful copy of the Ma'rifatnama, which you'll hear more about from Özgen momentarily. And finally, we round out, We round out this exploration of materials with items representing everyday life and the art of the book, as in these two examples, which we'll get back to in a moment. So if you visit us, and we very much hope you do, you'll encounter diverse books from lavishly illuminated Qur'ans, like the one I just showed you, elegant calligraphy albums, and delicately illustrated epics and chronicles, to well-thumbed prayer books, beloved poetry collections, detailed maps, learned science and mathematics volumes, and many more. Through these items, our exhibition underscores that Islamic civilization has never been a homogeneous phenomenon, that ideas and artistic practices always circulated between and among Muslims, Jews, Christians, and other faith communities in these territories. And what you see on screen now is kind of a selection, again, of the breadth that we're trying to put on display. So whether that's a book printed in movable type in Bucharest, a wonderful letter in on papyrus, which I encourage you to go look at for the very perhaps resonant themes that you'll encounter if you go see it. The Ottoman imperial document in the bottom right, and then this beautiful cowrie shell binding at the bottom. And with that cowrie shell binding, you start getting a sense of the materiality of the objects in the exhibit. This is another thing we were trying to foreground. And you see another great example of this in these two examples from the art of the book that I mentioned, where on the one hand you have on the left an Indonesian manuscript written on mulberry paper, and on the right you have a Turkish manuscript written on paper from a Russian paper mill. And you can kind of, if you see that little embossing in the lower right corner, that's actually the stamp of the Russian paper mill. Again, talking about the breadth of the collections and the breadth that we're trying to share through this exhibition. So we envision this exhibition to serve as an introduction to the collection in the many, many senses of the ways we can introduce folks. We hope to raise the profile of this collection among students and scholars. We hope to welcome new audiences to these materials and to the Beinecke. And we hope to help set the stage for future work in the collections. And in a similarly welcoming spirit, I want to just echo on behalf of my co-curators and colleagues, and to repeat Tobias's invitation to invite you all to our exhibition opening, which will happen next Wednesday, or this coming Wednesday on at 5 p.m. at the Beinecke. And with that, we'll look forward to your questions at the end, and I will hand it off to Robin.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Agnieszka, for this terrific introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of a foretaste of a talk I'm going to be giving in another few weeks, focusing on the history of this collection and how this stuff got here, which is a topic I've been researching for over 12 years. And I think it's a really interesting story, and one that's not touched on in great depth in the exhibit, but it's definitely part of the backstory. And how did this stuff all end up here at Yale? And along the way, I'll show you some of my favorites that are included in the exhibit. So may I have the next slide, please? So I have to move very quickly, which is not my usual way. So, and I have to speak fast, which is my usual way. So just hang on. I always like to retell the story of the foundational myth of Yale, and it is also the foundational myth of the library. This gift of books, this famous story that everybody's heard when the 10 ministers showed up in a small town east of here and basically founded a college with a gift of books. And that is sort of the backstory behind the Middle East and Islamic manuscript collections, that the important gifts were part of its foundation as well as important purchases along the way. So could I have the next slide, please? In the first printed catalog of the college, I was just curious. I'm always trying to figure out, what was the exposure of a typical Yale undergraduate in 1742, for example, to materials that were not from Western countries. And in the first printed catalog, I found several examples. There's more, but I just highlighted the three here of books that are about non-Western languages, particularly what they called at the time Oriental languages. In other words, meaning Hebrew, Arabic, Armenian, Ethiopic, Persian, Turkish, the basically non-Western languages, but not including Chinese and Japanese yet. The third item that I've listed in the center, you'll see a list of 3 titles. That third item, the Lexicon Heptaglotton, is an item that is in our exhibit, and you can see it when you come to visit us, and you will see this beautiful display of the printing type that was used for each of these different 7 languages, all arranged on one page in what must have been a tour de force of typesetting. Can I have the next slide, please? The person that we have principally to thank for the development of the collections here, of the Islamic manuscript collections here at Yale, is our hero, Edward Elbridge Salisbury, and I hope everybody will have his name tripping off their tongue very easily. He was a major benefactor to Yale at various points in the 19th century, but a little bit of an unsung hero. In 1870, he donated his entire personal collection of books and manuscripts related to the study of languages, non-Western languages, principally Arabic and Sanskrit. The books used to be held in his house. That's the picture of the house. I got it from the wonderful New Haven Museum library collection. The New Haven County Courthouse stands there now, unfortunately, but the books used to be kept in that house. He donated them to Yale in 1870, along with approximately 100, just over 100 manuscripts. So the next slide, please. And these are just a few examples. What he gave us was a small collection, but quite varied in language and type, principally Arabic, but also including Persian and Turkish language items. So I have one of each in this slide. All of these items are on display. We have a beautiful Arabic dictionary. A fundamental way to study language is, by studying its dictionaries. In the middle, we have what's called a mirror for princes, which is a kind of text which is sort of a moral guide for rulers, how to rule according to correct moral principles and correct religious principles. And then the third example is in Ottoman Turkish, and it's an example of this other area that we cover in the exhibit, which is not just documents made, for the elite, but also documents that were made sort of for ordinary use. The document on the right is actually a passport. It's on a single sheet, and it was written for an American missionary who was traveling in Turkey in, as you can see, the early part of the 19th century. So those are some examples from the Salisbury collection that are part of our exhibit. Could I have the next slide, please? We had the number of collections. It was 5 major acquisitions that created what we call the Islamic manuscript collection now. And this is, so Salisbury's was the first in 1870. The second major acquisition was a purchase of manuscripts that came from the collection of Count Carlo von Landberg. Carlo von Landberg deserves a book and a television series and a soap opera of his very own. He was a really idiosyncratic character. He was a Swedish Orientalist, an expert in Arabic dialects. And I'll just go ahead and say he was a little bit of an antiquities thief. Not in the materials that we have, but later in his career, there's this sort of darker side to him. Anyway, I'll be talking about him later, more about him. But anyway, from Landberg, we got a collection of over 800 highly significant manuscripts. Some of our oldest items came from the Landberg, or come from the Landberg collection, and some of our most curious and original and unusual items also come from that collection, including the one that you see on the left. Now, what you're seeing is not the view that's on display. This is a challenge of creating an exhibit. You have to pick. Go ahead to the next slide. You have to choose, and that was its title page, but what we have on display for you is the text inside, because the text is also unique and original and very fascinating. It's an encyclopedic text from Yemen. Landberg collected, our collection includes about 100 items from Yemen, possibly the largest single collection of Yemeni manuscripts in any US research library collection that I was able to figure out. And this particular text, I like to call it a complex acrostic. I'll tell you more about it in a couple of weeks, but what I can show you here is, if you notice the text on the right, it's red and black, but the text goes across in lines, but then there's these strange columns of words and letters in red. And on the left is sort of the key. This one text includes 5 separate texts, complete and intelligible, each one on their own. The key on the left is how to figure out how to find the texts within this. I show this to students and it blows their mind. I say, try to replicate this in English. Just try it. when you don't have television, you can do a lot. You know, you can create complicated documents of this kind. Can I have the next slide, please? Another favorite, this is one of my very favorite things from the Landberg collection, this wonderful encyclopedic work, which is everything that its compiler knew about where the Nile comes from as of 1655. Now, some of you may be aware that the source of the Nile was a great mystery and was not established until the 19th century. And in this book, the compiler, because it's anonymous, we don't know who, attempts to collect everything that he probably could find in the literature that was available, including this fascinating, on the left-hand side, what you see is a map of the Nile Valley. And it is a south-up map. In other words, the southern source of the Nile is at the top of the page, and the Mediterranean Sea is at the bottom of the page, a little bit opposite to what we expect. It's one of the reasons I love to show this. Can I have the next slide? Okay, the third major acquisition came in 1949, and we call it the Wellcome Krauss collection. It's more complicated than that, but the manuscripts came originally from the collections of this person, Wellcome. You've probably heard the name Wellcome associated with pharmaceuticals. He was an American entrepreneur, made lots of money. Like most entrepreneurs who make lots of money, he started collecting things. And he just collected, he was a little bit like Citizen Kane. He collected too much, and his trustees started dispersing the collections, and we were the benefit of one of these dispersals. So we have items in the exhibit that came out of this dispersal of materials. Everything from, on the left, you see a collection of classic Persian poetry by Hafiz. Many of you are familiar with Hafiz and his diwan, his collection of poems. And on the right, you see a West African devotional text. So it was a great variety of kinds of texts that were included in this particular acquisition. I go to the next slide, please. Oh, and I have to rush. Right. Okay. The fourth major acquisition came from a gentleman named Oskar Rescher, who was a German-Turkish scholar, a refugee from Germany during the Nazi period. He's a librarian, he was an academic, and he took up residence in Istanbul and began collecting and dealing in manuscripts. He lived in a house on the Bosporus with his many cats. That's why there's a cat there. We all like the Turkish cats. Can I have the next slide? Oskar Rescher's story is fascinating, and I hope to tell a little bit more about it in a few weeks. This is an example of text that came from that collection, this beautiful mystical text, which talks about how all of the different schools of Islamic law can be unified and can be interpreted as all emanating from one source, one divine source. And it's filled with these lovely diagrams that depict this idea of unification. Can I have the next slide? The last major acquisition came in 2005 when we purchased the collections from the Hartford Seminary. So you'll see many items identified Hartford Seminary manuscript. On the left is the person who had the idea of building the collection at Hartford Seminary, Duncan Black MacDonald. He was an expert in the Arabian Nights. And the gentleman in the lower right that you see is his assistant that he sent to Cairo and to Damascus in order to purchase the manuscripts. Mardirus Harutiun Ananikian was a faculty member at Hartford Seminary who helped in developing this collection, and it was approximately 1,200 items. It was a very large group of items that were purchased in 2005. And last slide from me is an example from this collection. Everybody loves this one. This is our allegedly our most dangerous manuscript. It is a esoteric, magical manuscript. If you can read Arabic, please do not read it out loud. I am not responsible for whatever jinn you might summon. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Özgen. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Oh, two more. Oh well, keep going.
You can go ahead, Robin, and complete it if you wish.
Go ahead and go back to it. I'll just say very quickly what these are. I did want to say that the exhibit, I did have a sort of a parting line, which was that the exhibit, as Agnieszka has already indicated, moves from the sacred to the profane, from the divine to the mundane, from the courtly to the common, and from the public to the private. And these were just some more examples of some of my favorites from the exhibit on various topics and in various languages. On the left, a wonderful collection of philosophical texts created in Baghdad. As you can see, wow, that date doesn't look right to me. This is a 13th century text. I think I transcribed the Hijra date maybe somehow. In any case, it's a collection of 7 philosophical texts by all your favorite Islamic and Muslim philosophers, Ibn Arabi, Al-Ghazali, other philosophers, including one Jewish philosopher, collected in one handy little item that the owner could carry with him and study at his leisure. This is an example of a beautiful object created for ordinary and private use, not for elite use. Up in the upper right corner, we have a wonderful text on music theory. And in the lower right, this book is incredible. It's mathematical in nature. It tells you how to build an astrolabe. The book includes the mathematical calculations. As you can see, all the information you would need to make your marks on your astrolabe. And then its bindings are also astronomical instruments, but we can only show you when we have to pick what we show you. So we chose to show you the tables. Can I have the last one then? And then just a few more examples. In the upper right, the Persian playing cards. So I said from the divine to the mundane. We wanted to be sure to include items that reflected what people sort of held in their hands in ordinary everyday life and used. In the lower right, you see a book of poetry where the copyist has ornamented by turning the lines of poetry into these beautiful illustrations surrounded by birds. And on the left, 2 very old and beautiful manuscripts. One of them is actually veterinary. The top left is a veterinary manuscript. And the lower left is our oldest Ottoman Turkish manuscript, which I will leave it at that. Thank you so much. Thanks, Özgen.
Sure. Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Agnieszka, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by echoing Robin and Agnieszka. Indeed, there are many things that make this exhibition special, and there are so many items in this exhibit that excite me. As an Ottomanist, I am especially excited about the Turkish manuscripts, which are not as known as the other collections in the Beinecke and will now be displayed for the first time. We have been cataloging the uncatalogued nearly 600 Turkish manuscripts since the fall of 2022 with Ayşe Çiçek Ünal, our graduate student assistant from the history department. And I have published some findings on these manuscripts and have previously presented excerpts from this collection on multiple occasions. With almost half of the collection being cataloged, Taught by the Pen offers a perfect and timely venue to showcase some of these highly precious items. And today I want to share a few of these newly and previously cataloged Turkish manuscripts, which can be visited in the exhibition until August 11. Here we go. May I have the first slide, please? Thank you. This is İskendername, the Book of Alexander. It's a romance about the historical and legendary stories of Alexander the Great. This Turkish copy, penned by Ahmedi, is dedicated to Prince Süleyman Çelebi, Emir Süleyman, and it is the first Alexander romance known in Turkish literature. This is not only a history of the early Islamic Ottoman world, but an encyclopedic in its coverage of philosophy, politics, ethics, astronomy, and medicine as well. It is the oldest Turkish manuscript in Yale's collection, as Robin mentioned, also dated 1459. It is one of the earliest copies known, almost 40 years after the author's death, Ahmedi, who died in 1412, 1413. Next slide, please. The second item is a fine 18th century manuscript copy of the Marifetname, the Book of Gnosis, one of the most well-known and widely read texts in Ottoman Anatolia, one of the bestsellers of the Ottoman readers. It is a scholarly encyclopedia which covers a wide range of topics from astronomy, physiology, mathematics, biology, geometry, to physiognomy, faith, mysticism, and social, moral, and religious sciences. It is adorned throughout with golden polychrome decorations, and its folios are finely illuminated with colored diagrams, maps, and astronomical tables. This double folio illustration provides an abstract map of the celestial world, including heaven and hell. The copy we have was produced in 1790, only 10 years after the death of the author Ibrahim Hakkı Erzurumi, who died in 1780. While many copies of the Marifetname are from the 19th century, the Beinecke copy stands out as one of the few copies from the 18th century. And this is one of the 5 known copies in American institutions. The Special Collections Research Center of the University of Michigan holds a copy. New York Public Library has 2 copies, and Vassar College also has a copy, which I am proud to have discovered very recently last summer with Ayşe Çiçek Ünal. By the way, as a side note, the Vassar copy is dated 1781, right after the author's death, which is so exciting. The text reflects the author's close familiarity with some of the well-known earlier Islamic texts. Of them, 2 particular Ottoman cosmography and geography texts with maps and illustrations are especially significant for us. The Cihannuma, Mirror of the World of Katip Çelebi, the foremost Ottoman intellectual who penned many works on geography, history, and biography, and the Tarihi Hindi Garbi, a history of the West Indies, which I will introduce in a minute. Next slide, please. So İskendername is a beautiful example of the late 14th Ottoman literature and manuscript tradition. We also have items that exquisitely exemplify the evolution and changes in Ottoman manuscript culture. The one on the right is an Elif Bacüzi alphabet book. It's an Ottoman item in Arabic by Mehmet Şefik Bey, a 19th century calligrapher, a court artist. It was most likely intended to be a gift for a young Ottoman noble just beginning to learn to read. On the left is a collection of poems by Halim Giray Sultan, the son of one of the last Crimean Khans. As a poet, Halim Giray was already famous during his lifetime. Focusing on elegance and intricate details, these lavishly gilded opening pages vividly represent the influence of the Rococo style on the Ottoman book arts. Next slide, please. As Robin and Agnieszka, mentioned, not everything is a codex or manuscript in the exhibit. We wanted to showcase non-codex items and printed books as well. The new printing technology from Germany had been used by religious minorities in the Ottoman Empire since the late 15th century. For example, Jewish populations had been printing since 1493, and Agnieszka showed like an image of this text, and you will see if you visit hopefully the exhibit, you will see that item. But official Ottoman printing began in 1726-27 with Ibrahim Müteferrika, a Hungarian-born Unitarian. Upon converting to Islam, Ibrahim Müteferrika entered the Ottoman diplomatic service and established his printing press in Istanbul after obtaining a license from Sultan Ahmet III. Before the printing press, among his workshop's first publications were 3 maps. He had produced a woodlock printed map of the Sea of Marmara in 1719 to be presented to the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, and then a large-scale map of the Black Sea in 1724, and the map of Persia or Iran in 1729 or 1730. Actually, it is said that there's also like there's also a map of Egypt, but I couldn't locate it actually, that map. These were the first maps printed in the Islamic world. In the exhibit, we have 2 of these maps printed by Müteferrika, the maps of the Persian Empire and the Black Sea. Yale's copy of the map of Persia is the only known copy in the United States, and the map of the Black Sea is one of only 6 surviving copies. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is Hadisi Nev, better known as Tarihi Hindi Garbi, or the history of the West Indies. This Ibrahim Müteferrika printed 17 books, and this is the fourth book printed in the Arabic alphabet and the first colored and the first in color in the Ottoman Empire, printed again by Müteferrika, as I mentioned, by the Müteferrika printing house. Deriving from Spanish and Italian sources, Tarih-i Hind-Garbi is an anonymous geography and history of the discovery and exploration of the New World. It is known as the oldest book on America to appear east of Venice and Vienna. In 1583, it was presented to Sultan Murad III, who is known for his passion for unknown world. And I'm sure he really enjoyed the book. And the book is illustrated with many maps and images. The cosmography that introduces the work relies on medieval Arabic and Persian authors such as Al-Qazwini, Al-Suyuti. The image you see here depicts the famous wak-wak tree with women growing on the tree as fruit. If you have a chance to visit the exhibit in person, in the table case on your left, when you enter the Beinecke, you will find these Müteferrika prints next to each other, and nearby an Ottoman Navy book, a manuscript full of maps, Katip Çelebi's Tuhfet el-Kibar fi Asfar el-Bihar, gift to the great on naval campaigns, which was also among the 17 books printed by Ibrahim Müteferrika. And the next, please. And here is our female book stealing demon, who herself is a wonder of creation, like those in the Tarihi Garbi Hindi.